The vastness of space stretched before them, a black abyss speckled with the distant glow of dying stars. It was an eerie silence, the kind that came before a storm, before the slaughter began. Thousands of ships hung in formation above Royan Prime, a testament to a fragile alliance forged not from trust, but from necessity. High Captain Zorth stood on the command deck of the Sovereign Wrath, his claws gripping the cold metal railing as he watched the tactical holoscreen. The Armada was a patchwork of species, each with their own strengths, their own designs, human warships bristling with kinetic weaponry and layered shields, Royan dreadnoughts built for overwhelming firepower, and the sleek, energy-efficient cruisers of the Talari. But against the Erebus, would it be enough? His eyes flickered to the Indomitable, humanity's most formidable warship. Even among the massed fleets, it stood apart, its armor black as the void, its silhouette hunched like some primal beast waiting to pounce. Captain Elias Grant, the man who had first warned the galaxy of the coming horror, was aboard that ship. A man who had seen the Erebus up close and lived to tell the tale. The silence did not last. A ripple passed through space. It was subtle at first, like the universe itself had inhaled sharply. Then, darkness unfolded. They had arrived. The first Erebus ships did not appear on sensors. They did not warp in. They did not emerge from the known lanes of space. They simply were. One moment, there was emptiness. The next, their grotesque forms pulsed in the void. Ships? Creatures? It was impossible to tell where biology ended and technology began. Their surfaces twisted with living metal, shifting plates forming strange, ever-changing patterns. Some of the ships pulsed with a sickly glow, their hulls adorned with the skeletal remains of those who had come before. Others looked like husks of vessels that had been assimilated, ghost ships, twisted beyond recognition. And then they moved. The lead Erebus vessel lunged forward, splitting apart like an unfolding insect, exposing a writhing mass of tendrils tipped with something that glowed an unnatural green. 100 organic lances fired forward, cutting across space like whips of liquid death. "Shields up! Fire all forward batteries!" The command came from a dozen different admirals at once. The void erupted into chaos. The humans fired first. Massive railgun rounds screamed through the dark, impacting the Erebus warforms with the force of a meteor strike. Some found purchase, breaking apart the twisting black armor in bursts of violet flame. Others simply vanished, disintegrated before they could land. The Erebus had already adapted. The Royan dreadnoughts followed suit. Plasma lances cut through the void, scorching through the strange flesh-metal hulls, causing them to convulse, as though the ships themselves were alive. And then the Erebus returned fire. The first Talari cruiser never had a chance. A beam of spiraling energy lanced through its shields like paper, and in an instant the ship was gone, not destroyed, but absorbed, its very matter pulled into the Erebus vessel like water into a sponge. The screams of its crew echoed over the comms before cutting off abruptly. Zorth clenched his fists. This was worse than even the humans had described. "All Dominion vessels maintain formation. Keep the pressure on their flanks." The Indomitable surged forward, moving like a predator striking its prey. The warship unleashed a wave of kinetic hellfire, slug after slug slamming into the lead Erebus behemoth. But the creature ship twisted. It learned, adapted, and then did the impossible. It opened. The Erebus ship peeled apart into jagged segments, revealing a gaping maw of writhing tendrils and churning molten energy. Then, without warning, it lunged. "Brace!" The Indomitable barely maneuvered in time as the Erebus ship devoured a nearby Union vessel whole. Swallowed it, consumed it, leaving nothing behind but warped debris. The ship's remains twisted as if alive, shifting and reshaping into something new, something Erebus. A horrifying realization struck Zorth. They weren't just destroying ships, they were adding them to their own. "Target the cores. Do not engage their hulls directly." Grant's voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the urgency. "They're absorbing energy fire. Kinetic strikes to their vitals only," Zorth snarled. "Then let's see how they handle this." The Sovereign Wrath powered up its singularity cannons, ancient weapons from the Dominion's deepest archives. These were not conventional weapons. They did not fire plasma or slugs. They fired void itself, pockets of collapsing gravity, miniature black holes that devoured anything they touched. Firing. The first singularity round hit the Erebus warform. A wound tore open in its hull, black tendrils thrashing as the section collapsed into itself. The Erebus shrieks, a sound that was felt more than heard, rippled through every open channel. It was wounded. It could feel pain, but it did not die. The wound sealed. The ship's own flesh rippled, reshaping, hardening. It had already adapted. Zorth cursed. "They're learning faster than expected." The battle had just begun, but already they were losing ships by the dozens. The Erebus were unlike anything the galaxy had ever fought. They did not just kill. They consumed, assimilated, grew stronger with every engagement. Then something changed. The Indomitable surged forward, risky, reckless. It plowed through the wreckage of fallen vessels, ignoring incoming fire, and then its forward bays opened. Zorth's eyes widened. "What are they?" He had seen humans use railguns, plasma, missiles. He had seen their warships tear through enemy fleets with brutal efficiency. But this was madness. The Indomitable detached entire sections of its own armor, deploying thousands of autonomous drones, each carrying plasma bombs lined with neutron destabilizers, weapons designed to disrupt molecular cohesion. Fire at will. The drones swarmed the Erebus vessels, detonating inside their wounds, preventing them from regenerating. The Erebus shuddered, their forms losing cohesion, struggling to adapt in time. For the first time since the battle had begun, the Erebus retreated. They weren't fleeing in panic. No, they were watching, calculating. They had tested the Alliance's forces and had seen their potential, and they were preparing their next move. As the Erebus slipped back into the abyss, Zorth released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had survived, but barely. The fleet had lost a third of its ships, countless lives gone in the blink of an eye. He turned to Grant. "They weren't fighting to win, were they?" Grant exhaled, watching the black void where the Erebus had vanished. "Number they were scouting." Silence. Then, Zorth spoke the words neither of them wanted to say. "Next time they won't just be testing us. Next time they'll come to finish this." The galaxy was at war. The battle over Royan Prime had been only the beginning, a brutal skirmish that had left the Alliance fleet shaken, but intact. Yet even as the survivors licked their wounds, the truth loomed over them like a death sentence. The Erebus had learned, and they were coming back. Reports streamed in from the outer sectors. Entire colonies had gone silent overnight. Fleets that should have held for weeks were wiped out in mere hours. The Erebus were no longer just testing their enemies. They were assimilating, evolving, adapting. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Elias Grant watched the tactical displays with grim focus. The galactic map before him was a horror show. Red zones creeping outward like a growing cancer, entire star systems now marked as contaminated. The war wasn't just turning against them. They were losing. and they were losing fast. The first full-scale Erebus invasion came at Duran Foth, a heavily fortified Dominion stronghold. 10 battle groups stood ready: Human, Royan, Talari, and several lesser factions, prepared for another engagement like Royan Prime. But this was not Royan Prime. When the Erebus fleet arrived, they did not emerge from warp corridors or through traditional FTL lanes. They manifested as if space itself had folded in on them, spilling their grotesque war forms into the system like an open wound. The Alliance forces opened fire instantly. Plasma beams, railgun rounds, and antimatter torpedoes rained down upon the Erebus ships. The void itself burned, and the Erebus didn't even flinch. Where before they had adapted over the course of battle, now they adapted in real time. Their ships reshaped and twisted before the very eyes of their enemies, turning hulls impervious to kinetic slugs, redirecting plasma bolts through strange, organic lattice structures. By the time the fleet adjusted their tactics, the Erebus were already upon them. The first casualties were not ships, but mines. Somewhere in the midst of the battle, the Erebus unveiled a new horror, a psychic pulse, a silent scream that echoed across every open comm channel. It wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of corruption. Crew members clutched their heads as their thoughts were invaded by something ancient and hungry. They screamed, convulsed, and then stopped. Their eyes darkened, their bodies stiffened, and then they turned on their own crews. Ship after ship went silent, their crews overtaken by the Erebus hive mind. They didn't just lose vessels to destruction, they lost them to the enemy. The battle lasted less than 30 minutes. Duran 5 fell. The Erebus didn't conquer the planet. They didn't destroy it. They absorbed it. The very surface of the world began to shift. Black tendrils creeping across the terrain, cities twisting into grotesque alien structures, as if the planet itself had become one of them. And then it was gone. Not destroyed, not left in ruins. Gone. The Erebus took the entire world, and Duran 5 was never seen again. The news spread like wildfire. The Erebus weren't just winning, they were consuming. The alliance cracked. Worlds began defecting. Some species fled into deep space, abandoning the war entirely. Others turned on their allies, believing that humanity had provoked the Erebus into this war. Civil war erupted in sectors that should have been united against the threat, and the Erebus continued to spread. On the bridge of the Sovereign Wrath, High Captain Zorth faced the growing reality of defeat. His people, the Royan Dominion, had ruled vast sectors of space for millennia. They had faced invasions, civil wars, and galactic disasters. But this was different. This was the end. He turned to the holographic figure of Captain Grant, standing firm aboard the Indomitable. "We cannot hold. We cannot win. We must flee." Grant's expression was stone. "There's nowhere to run to. If we fall back, they'll just keep spreading." Zorth bared his teeth. "And if we stay, we die." For the first time in its history, the alliance fractured. Entire fleets abandoned their posts. Some sought to make deals with the Erebus, as if they could bargain with something that only knew hunger. Others simply vanished, taking their species and their ships into the void, hoping to escape the inevitable. The Erebus attacked Earth next, the heart of human civilization, the birthplace of the species that had first sounded the alarm. The greatest fleet ever assembled waited in high orbit, 300 capital ships, thousands of escort craft, every planetary defense platform armed and ready. And it wasn't enough. The Erebus did not attack from the void. They emerged from inside the fleet itself. Captured ships, once thought lost, suddenly powered back on. Their weapons turned inward. Entire battle groups were infected before they even knew what had happened. The orbital defense network fired blindly as Erebus warforms descended toward Earth's surface. They hit the atmosphere like a living plague, black tendrils spreading across continents, entire cities being absorbed into their ever-growing mass. The fight was hopeless. And then the unthinkable happened. Humanity had one last option, a weapon so devastating, so final, that it had never been used in recorded history. Project Excalibur, a weapon designed not to destroy planets, but to erase them. The last transmission from Earth was a single command: detonate. And then the planet was gone. Not destroyed, not left in ruins. Gone. A hole remained where Earth had been, a wound in space itself, a tear in the fabric of reality. The Erebus invasion had been stopped, but at a cost so great, humanity ceased to be a home-world species. The Indomitable and its fleet escaped, but they did not celebrate. Humanity had won one battle, but they had lost everything. The Erebus were still out there, and now they knew that the Alliance was desperate. From the shadows of deep space, the remnants of the fleet prepared for the final stand. There was no victory left to hope for, no home to return to. There was only one last battle, one final mission, to make sure the Erebus never spread beyond this galaxy, even if it meant burning everything to the ground. A dying galaxy, a shattered alliance, a relentless enemy. The war was lost. And yet, the war was not over. The remnants of the once mighty alliance, what was left of humanity, the Royan Dominion, the Talari Protectorate, and a few scattered fleets of other species, had fled to the farthest reaches of space. There was no sanctuary, no safe haven. Only the cold, uncharted abyss where the Erebus had not yet reached. But survival was not an option. This was not a war that could be endured. It was a war that had to be ended. Aboard the battered flagship Indomitable, the last War Council convened. High Captain Zorth, scarred and weary, spoke first. "We cannot win a war of attrition. The Erebus consume, they evolve, they adapt. There is no bargaining, no stalemate. This ends one of two ways: we die or they do." Captain Elias Grant, the last surviving leader of the Terran fleet, leaned forward. "Then we stop running. We stop retreating. We take the fight to them." Silence. Zorth's golden eyes narrowed. "Suicide." Grant gave a bitter smile. "Only if we fail." They had one advantage left, one final, desperate chance. The destruction of Earth had wounded the Erebus. It was the first time they had suffered a true loss. When humanity detonated Project Excalibur, it had erased a part of their hive mind, severed it as if cutting off a limb. The Erebus had reacted. They had recoiled. For the first time, they had hesitated, which meant they could be killed. If they struck at the heart of the Erebus, if they found their core intelligence, the thing that guided the swarm, there was a chance. A slim, impossible chance. "There's an old human saying," Grant murmured, "cut off the head and the body dies." It was madness. It was their only hope. The intelligence reports were fragmented, unreliable, desperate whispers from deep space probes that barely survived long enough to transmit their data. But they all pointed to one terrifying reality. The Erebus had a center, a hive core. It was not a planet, nor a star system. It was a living construct the size of a moon, pulsing with an intelligence beyond comprehension. The source. Destroy it, and the Erebus might collapse. Miss, and the last remnants of the galaxy would be devoured. The plan was simple. Find the source, penetrate its defenses, deliver the weapon. Humanity's last superweapon, the second and final Excalibur warhead, had been built in secret before Earth fell. Designed to erase existence itself, the warhead could not just destroy, but unmake. If they could detonate it at the heart of the Erebus mind, they could burn the entire swarm from the inside out. A fleet of less than 100 ships, the last of the Alliance, set course for the abyss beyond the known galaxy, to the hive's beating heart. The Erebus sensed them long before they arrived. They did not send a fleet to intercept. They did not engage in battle. Instead, the Indomitable and its fleet were pulled into the abyss, into a churning mass of writhing, blackened space, a region where the laws of physics no longer applied. The source loomed before them, a monstrous, pulsating entity, not a structure but a living thing, larger than any moon, shifting and reshaping itself with incomprehensible alien intelligence. Then the whispers began. The Erebus did not speak in words. They spoke through thought, through terror, through the screams of those they had taken. The voices of the dead filled the comm channels. Familiar voices, lost crew, friends, family. They were mocking them. Captain Grant clenched his fists. "Ignore it. Full burn. We're going in." The fleet charged into the storm. The battle was unlike anything that had come before. There were no ships in the conventional sense, only masses of shifting biomass, tendrils the size of battle cruisers, entire vessels being swallowed whole by the very space around them. The Indomitable led the charge, weapons firing in all directions, cutting a path through the living nightmare. One by one, their ships fell, consumed, overtaken, turned against them, but they pushed forward, through the storm, through the madness, until the source loomed before them, its pulsing, blackened heart exposed. The Excalibur warhead had to be delivered manually. There would be no escape. Captain Grant stood before his crew, looking into the faces of those who had followed him to the end. No orders, no speeches, just a nod. Then he boarded the last strike craft, the Excalibur-class bomber, carrying the weapon that would end the war. Zorth's voice crackled over the comms. "You do this, there's no coming back." Grant smiled. Never planned to. Then he was gone, diving into the abyss. The source reacted, sensing the threat, writhing, twisting its very form to stop him. Grant pushed forward, through the tendrils, the madness, the screaming voices of the dead. One last push, one final moment. He closed his eyes and whispered, "For Earth." Detonation. The universe went silent. The war was over. The Erebus screamed, a scream that rippled across the stars, a death cry that shook the fabric of space itself. And then they collapsed. Every infected world, every corrupted fleet, every Erebus construct simply ceased. They did not die. They were erased. The remnants of the fleet, barely a dozen ships, drifted in the aftermath. A galaxy saved at the cost of everything. Captain Grant was gone, but his name would never be forgotten. The war was over, but the scars would never heal. Earth was gone. Humanity was homeless. The Alliance was dead. But life continued. Among the stars, the survivors rebuilt. Humanity and its allies became nomads, wanderers, spreading across the void like the embers of a dying fire. They had won, but the galaxy would never be the same. And in the dark corners of the cosmos, beyond the edge of known space, something watched and waited.